I'm speaking to the lost soul that abides in this place. Come to me. Speak to me. Let me show you the way home.
Welcome to a Tin Dog podcast, this time reviewing the latest in Matt Smith's Series 7B, if you want to call it that, the fourth story of 2013, HIDE. Now before I begin, I just want to address, well, it's not even an elephant in the room. It's the one reason the internet will have had a bit of a meltdown. Twitter will have gone off in a huff, and a lot of people will have been, well, shouting at the TV. You see, Matt Smith said,
"A blue crystal from Metabolis 3.
When everyone knows it's actually pronounced
The crystal from Metabolis 3.
Which is fair enough. The thing is, when I was watching it, I was kind of pleased that this happened, because that moment of distraction took me out of the story, made me a little bit cross, but saved me from nightmares, because I was buying into this story hook, line and sinker. I'd completely given myself over to the whole narrative. The ghost story had dragged me in, kicking and screaming against my better judgment. I'd been presented with a seriously good Doctor Who story, and to be honest, I was just a little bit terrified. My ability to suspend my disbelief was completely shattered by Matt Smith saying those lines, and that's something I'm grateful for. It saved me from nightmares. Straight off, the important thing to remember is that this is Doctor Who. It's not strictly speaking a ghost story, but it is the most incredible format going. Now, my prediction that there was going to be something specific to a Doctor per story, i.e. in the first week, mentions of Susan, second week, Hads, third week, Metabolis Crystal, however it's chosen to be pronounced. So probably next week we're going to have something iconic with the fourth Doctor, be it jelly babies or a scarf. The fifth Doctor, there'll probably be a piece of celery turning up. The sixth Doctor, God help us if it's the coat, but I can't think of anything else that's definitively sixth Doctor other than curly hair and perhaps some sarcasm. There might be a lot of sarcasm appearing in that story. The seventh Doctor, all I can think of is a terrible pullover and perhaps a very nice umbrella. Am I being predictable to say that would be iconic moments? Or are they going to be more prosaic? Because in many respects this story it had the atmosphere of a third Doctor story. Now, the third Doctor didn't actually ever engage with, well, we'll call them ghosts. Except, of course, in Day of the Daleks, where the Doctor applied science over magic, rather to disprove the ghosts. And then again, there's an example in, say, The Demons, where the Doctor, again, uses science to disprove magic or religion or whatever you want to do. It's always an idea, a concept. Now, the thing I need to mention straight off is that it's been rammed down our throats week after week at this point that Clara is an ordinary girl. And that was, after all, the Doctor's entire motivation for embarking on this whole story. Almost in payment for his intervention, he gets to use the empath's powers and find out that yes, indeed, she truly is just an ordinary girl. Words that we hear over and over again. They're not exactly bad wolf. It's more Moffat's definitely making a point. She is perfectly ordinary, which that means something happens to her. Now, not to get anyone excited, and this of course is a lot of fan nonsense, but what could shatter someone through time? I don't know. An exploding TARDIS? Yeah, we're never going to find out why the TARDIS exploded. Let's just leave it there. But it could send someone through time, couldn't it? Leave it? Leave it. That's not going to happen. So we've got something that's the theme, the feel of the third Doctor. Yes, I know he did a ghost story, The Ghosts of N-Space, on audio. That had the Brigadier. And if you have never heard it, it's kind of worth tracking down. So yeah, there are ghostly feelings that would be linked with this sort of thing. Now the problem with this whole story, for me, is that basically it's literally horrific. Even the creature at the very, very end looked appalling. It looked like something that I'm going to be very, very surprised isn't going to give a lot of people a lot of nightmares. How many people out there were actually frightened of Davros when they were a kid? This thing was hideous. Even when you found out it was reasonably benevolent. Yes, just because something's in love with another gloopy monster doesn't make it a good guy. It just means that it's got feelings. Lots of people had feelings, but you wouldn't want to hang around with them. Am I being, well, what's the pan-dimensional version of racist? Is it racist? Is it alienist? Either way, gave me the creeps. Yeah, the basic plot involving the woman who's eventually going to play Verity Lambert in that Adventures in Space and Time, or Time and Space, whatever it's going to end up being called, was great. She does have a certain wide-eyed innocence. Yes, the parallels between her relationship being assistant and companion, because if you call someone a companion in the 70s, it sounds more dodgy than assistant. Oh, how political correctness has changed our language. That's dealt with superbly in this story. You've got a lovely echoed relationship, but because they're both human, it comes across in a more, well, tenanty kind of way. Yes, the performances, all of them in this, are brilliant, but by far the greatest performance in the whole episode comes from the cameraman. Now, I know this story's been written by the same person who wrote Rings of Agadoo, but he wrote this first. This was the story that obviously was living inside of his head, something he wanted to get out. Now, if it had been shot differently, more child-friendly, you could have stuck with exactly the same plot, but there were filming techniques that were straight out of Poltergeist. Hell, the whole tying someone to a wall and jumping through the dimensional portal was straight out of Poltergeist. There were also nods to so many ghost stories, but this, for me, is the single most frightening Doctor Who story. Yes, that was the way things were shot. I mean, maybe Matt Smith belongs in a scary forest. Some of his greatest scenes ever have been filmed in those. But it worked. Yes, I know scary forests are by far at their best when they're things like American Werewolf in London. Yes, you can cite examples of how those same things have been filmed shot for shot, but that works for me. The thing it reminded me most, however, is the ghost tapes about a haunted ancient building being used to record events by the same guy who wrote Quatermass. If you ever get a chance to track that down, heartily recommend that. It sometimes gets repeated on BBC 4, I think. Well worth seeing if you see it pop up sometime. It's of its time, but it's well worth seeing. So yes, incredibly atmospheric. It dragged you in, and with the exception of that fluff that appeared on the screener copy, simply foolproof, flawless. And yet, my wife, when I turned to her, was reading a magazine. She just said she'd got bored. She'd seen it all done before elsewhere, and the plot just seemed hollow. There were some lovely moments of charm, that business with the Doctor visiting the same point throughout history, and Jenna-Louise Coleman just watching on. She said peachy keen, Jenna-Louise Coleman's character, Souffle Girl. Now for me, that instantly made me think of Neil Gaiman's Death. That's one of her first lines. Whenever she appears, I think it's in issue 7 of Sandman. I instantly thought, of course, it was a reference to the Sandman and Neil Gaiman's work, but apparently it wasn't. Apparently it's a reference to Greece. It's what one of the characters in that says, admittedly sarcastically. It does make considerably more sense than having a clearly non-gothic, non-emo girl who probably hasn't read Sandman in her life coming out with a line like that. The chances of Souffle Girl having seen Greece, I would say, are quite high. So we come back to the classic argument. Is this too scary? Now, I did a bit of maths on a piece of paper, so I could be wrong. But say, for example, this series hadn't been shown now, and it had been shown at the end of the year, and it would run straight on to the anniversary special. Makes sense. Could have happened. We were never completely sure when this was going to be shown. We knew that it would be on sometime this year before the anniversary. Well, this would have been the Halloween episode. And that makes more sense. There will be complaints to the BBC about the way it was filmed, the way it looked, the way it was shot. But then again, as children, we always wanted Doctor Who to be scary. And now, as adults and parents, some of us just can't take the pressure. The same pressure that our parents were under all those years ago. Is this the scariest Doctor Who ever made? I suspect so. Was it timey-wimey? Yes. But as your brain was put on neutral in order to enjoy it, you can let that go. There were some comedy moments. Even I smiled at bricking up some spam. But yes, the chances of the BBC being inundated by complaints and it being complaint to go-go are very, very high. For me, this wasn't as good as Cold War, which is the highlight of, well, perhaps Matt Smith's entire time. But it is a story that will stay with me for a very, very long time. Before I fade away, some people have emailed asking me about the letter that appeared in Doctor Who magazine that I wrote. Issue 259, page 10. And if you don't mind, I'll just read it out loud now. It'll save a lot of hassle. I just wanted to add my praise to Doctor Who magazine for publishing the John Pertwee interview. I only met John once, but it was simply wonderful. He agreed to let me go to his house to record, free of charge, a voiceover for an animated film I was making as part of my degree. He was warm and welcoming, willing to welcome fans into his home and share his stories. I was in studio recording the plasticine puppets to match his words when news of his death came on the radio. I like to think that I was working on his last film. He is truly missed, and your interview has allowed others to share in the life of the man who truly was the Doctor. I only choose to read that letter out to you now because this was the third Doctor story, admittedly with Matt Smith. Next time, it's going to be Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS, and Lord only knows what's going to appear in that. So until next time, be seeing you. You've been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its connected properties are copyright and trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. To contact the show, email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. Whostrology, a Time Traveller's Almanac, is available through Telos Publishing or Amazon. Visit www.whostrology.com for further information. The Tin Dog Podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.